Graphics don't matter. I'm sure you've heard this one before. It's a common sentiment. It's the idea that story and gameplay are primary and that everything else that surrounds that is secondary. At face value, it seems like a no-brainer. Of course it's true. Why would I care about the visual or auditory experience of the game if I'm not even having fun interacting with it? The gameplay of a game is above all else the vital factor. Recently though, one question has kept rattling around in my mind. If games truly do live or die on their gameplay, then why all the effort? What I mean by that is, why do we have so many talented artists and designers creating these immaculate worlds, constantly pushing the barriers of visual fidelity and artistry, spending ungodly amounts of money to do so, when the crux of a game and its gameplay, and by extension the design of its systems which inform that gameplay, are vital? Why is it when we see games and experience them, talk about them to others, so much of that conversation is framed around fidelity, immersion, or artistry? Something to me just wasn't right. Something about the term graphics don't matter just doesn't add up. And I believe I know what it is. The term graphics don't matter hinges on a distinct separation between the vital component of a game, its gameplay, and everything else that surrounds it. I think what it fails to capture is that the vital component, our gameplay, is not distinct from everything else. Visuals, audio, art, performances even. It all coalesces alongside systems, level design, UI to form what ultimately becomes our gameplay. The way that we play a game, the way that we experience it. So much of our visual experience is filled with noise, skins, packs of goodies, particle effects, celebrity cameos. It's not really a surprise that despite gameplay innovations, getting lost into a game's world is becoming harder and harder. There's so much about graphics that we can dive into today, but I really want to focus on that aspect that I just spoke about, the visual consistency, the noise, because I believe it does in fact matter, and it does have a tangible impact on the way we play games. Recently, I've been playing a lot of Horizon Forbidden West. I went into it with middling expectations, thinking that it would just be background noise to YouTube videos late at night, like so many games are now. Another distraction from chores rather than anything that was of some real substance. The reason for this is that it just didn't appear to be systematically that absorbing, or in other words, the gameplay looked fine, passable. You shoot dinosaurs really, and you dodge them. Cool. What ended up happening when I booted it up was quite the opposite. I was immediately drawn in, not by its gameplay or its itemization, which were, as I said, fine, not even by its story or characters or world building, which was again, fine, decent, nothing groundbreaking. No, Horizon drew me in because its visuals and the ease in which it allows you to explore them was enough to get me deeply immersed. It was the way in which it presented its world to me, how astonishing that world looked was the hook. That became my experience, my gameplay. Most obviously, its main draw was the machines, the giant robot dinosaurs. It's pretty simple to create a techno-dystopian aesthetic. We see it a lot in games, especially because it really evokes that sense of mystery and strangely occult fear that games can leverage to create tense experiences. What's difficult though is going further beyond that and using that as a base whilst attempting to blend it with a very rich and colorful world. This isn't a techno-dystopia akin to cyberpunk. This is a lush, beautiful world, and these aren't mindless, soulless monstrosities. They were created to reflect and sustain the diverse biology that once inhabited the planet. It's not a combination that's really supposed to work. On paper, it's a visual contrast that is so stark, but through the sheer attention to detail on display, it manages to accomplish this so well that it allows me as a player to suspend my disbelief despite the impossibility of it all. Visual consistency. Every machine looks completely different, but they are unified as if they were created by the same system in the same manufacturing plants, which they were. Every tribe in the game has pieces and influences of the previous world, plus ideologies and aesthetics that have emerged as a result of this machine-dominated landscape. All of their clothes, ornaments, housing, it's littered with pieces of these machines, a looming mechanical presence in an otherwise natural world. Not only that, but the remnants of previous times and battles littering the landscape are distinctly different in their design from the living machines that we fight. It all works. It all makes sense within the context of the world, and it did so well at allowing me to engage and make sense of it all. In hindsight, now that I've completed the game and I'm looking at it from a different lens, not a lot of Forbidden West actually makes any sense at all. The plot, the inhuman abilities of its main character, the gameplay scenarios that you're placed in, they're wild to say the least. And thinking about everything now, it's very easy to poke holes in its plot and its setting. But the important part is that in the moment, whilst I was going through the game, playing the game, I never had a moment where I stopped and questioned the insanity because I was so sold visually that I could suspend my disbelief. The world and all of its quirks made sense in that moment because I could see it. It was right in front of my eyes. I dwelled on that for a bit and it got me thinking, what is it about visuals? Why is visual consistency so important? What do we mean when we say that a game is visually inconsistent? That it doesn't have the right look about it, the right feel? How difficult is it to make a visually consistent world? And how easy is it to make things feel disconnected and out of place? All of these questions are the main topic of today, an exploration into visuals and visual consistency, and what it means for games.
We're in the new trade of advertising, which is an American art form about ensuring people buy the correct things.
All right, so let's start with the simple part. What is visual consistency? Visual consistency is about keeping all of the visual components of your game, or anything really, in keeping with a vision, an idea, a set of themes, something that you can convey or are attempting to convey. It's actually mainly a term used in marketing. It describes the visual consistency of imagery to convey a recognizable and understandable brand identity. In other words, these visuals, they convey ideas of what a company and product is. And so keeping them consistent helps define a niche and attract the right kind of customers for your business. In terms of games, it's a very similar purpose. Consistency helps us identify the scope of the world that we're in. It guides the player's understanding of the limitations and rules of the universe, which in turn better equips them to immerse themselves and invest themselves into a game world, similar to the ways in which a customer would invest in a brand. It can manifest itself in many ways: consistency of characters and their overall look, the way they are depicted, how stylized they are versus the world around them. Characters can visually represent alignments to factions or personality traits through their clothing, their look. They can have deformities or scars reflective of their presence in the universe, among other things. Characters' visual appearances, much like their writing and animations and mechanics, play a really central role in any game's visuals. But this consistency also extends to the game world, its architecture and design. Maybe it reflects or draws similarities to similar eras in time in the real world, or is a display of a development of culture. Environments can be, and often are, thought out and structured in a way that makes sense within the game's universe and its history. Destroyed monuments, signs of battle, central hubs of trading, they are placed with purpose. They depict to us, the player, what words or exposition are unable to, the real consequence of a game world that has been lived in by its characters or civilizations, who have their own understandings and have made their own conscious choices. Artistic consistency is another one. Games can be rendered or colored with certain recognizable artistic qualities. They can use these artistic qualities to evoke emotion or just simply present a unique style that separates it from other titles in the space. Consistency can take many forms. Unlike books where the reader is obligated to fill in the blanks and create their own consistent experience backed by the descriptions of the world, or movies where every frame can be meticulously perfected to create a sense of visual cohesion, games are different. Games allow the players to absorb worlds with more agency. There's a more deliberate attempt to make you, the consumer, a part of the universe. In doing so, they open themselves up to much more scrutiny by the players that inhabit them. It's one of the central components that makes gaming so special compared to other art forms: the ability for the player to interpret, inhabit, and understand the work at a level of detail and pace which is determined by them, not by the artist. It means that any lapse in consistency or any lack of nuance in design is more easily exposed by willing observers. And because these experiences are often far more consuming of a person's time and energy, errors or perhaps even creative decisions interpreted as misjudgments are exacerbated in gaming critiques.
Why do you think he removes their skins, Agent Starling? Throw me with your acumen.
It excites him.
I truly believe that one of the larger, less talked about impacts of the push into a live service landscape is the impact that it's had on visual consistency and its priority. The games that have the toughest time remaining visually consistent are MMOs and live service offerings, and this is just purely because of their size, scale, and longevity. The more tight your development timelines are, and the more you focus on building player retention infrastructure models rather than video games, the more difficult it becomes to maintain a consistent visual experience long term and still find a way to impress. These are also, ironically, the types of games that are least motivated to do so. These kinds of experiences rely on wow factor, the next shiny item that you can show off in front of your friends and strangers alike. And to impress, you need to stand out. To generate revenue from the sale of cosmetics, there is an inherent requirement to disobey the rules of your own universe. I've seen this sentiment a lot recently with the continued updates to Call of Duty Black Ops, which draws controversy and disgruntles its more traditional fan base with each new available skin that proudly disobeys the tone set by the Black Ops series and its story. For me personally though, I felt this same disgruntlement with my favorite MMO, Guild Wars 2. As a launch Guild Wars 2 player, it was easy to notice that as time went on and development costs continued, more and more outlandish and bright skins began to appear in the game's shop, more particle effects on brand new in-game skills, and just a general vibe that leaned more into style than substance. Both games aren't inherently bad by any stretch, but again, to remove the visual equation from things is to ignore a strong part of what makes these experiences what they are. It's by this token that we can start to pinpoint some of the games, or rather the types of games that often do visual consistency really well, either because visuals and visual storytelling is a pivotal component, or because their structure just makes maintaining consistency much easier. Small-scale indie games, I think, are the low-hanging fruit example here. It's an obvious advantage of not having the same development scale, but the indie scene nails visual consistency because it has such a huge advantage in this area compared to double or AAA, usually involving creative vision and intention of maybe one or a few dedicated artists and storytellers. Games like Ori, Timberborn, Abiotic Factor, Signalis, these are all games that put visual consistency at the center of their identity and nail it. But beyond that, we can see some prime examples of this when looking at a larger scale. To juxtapose the example of Call of Duty, let's take another fast-paced action shooter, Insurgency. Insurgency follows a very similar formula to the COD franchise: small maps, multiplayer shooting, some tactical kit without overdoing it, and most importantly, constant action, never a dull moment. These are two very different games, but fundamentally at their core, they share a lot of DNA, and they have a similar live service structure, although their pricing is wildly different, I might add. But despite that similarity in gameplay and system and structure, these are two games that attract very different audiences. They are two very different visual and auditory experiences. At its core, Insurgency has a far greater respect for its theme and its identity, and the result is really an experience that has a much greater sense of immersion. The experience of playing it is more visceral, as that respect allows you to really sink into a match mentally. It's a similar story for Battlefield 4, one of my favorite competitive shooters of all time, not necessarily because its gunplay or progression was that much better than its competition, but because it had this innate quality of pulling me into each of its rounds on a deeper level than just fishing for badges or rewards or high kill-death ratios. I was there for the excitement and the moment, and the visuals are a pivotal part of that moment. Even when we divert from the realistic nature and look at games that embrace a more silly, poppy, stylized approach, we can still see the merits of visual consistency. The Borderlands series really comes to mind here for me. Say what you want about its writing, but its visuals have managed to evolve in very interesting ways as its universe has slowly expanded without detracting from its core cel-shaded identity from back in 2009. Proof that elevating your gameplay experience, immersing your audience, isn't always purely about realism or fidelity. It can be achieved regardless of how outlandish your style is. It's achieving it, though, that can be a real losing battle. We've already touched on the rock and the hard place of innovation and maintaining interest versus maintaining a visually consistent experience. I think further than that, though, visual consistency is an imperfectible component because, as with all things artistic, much of it leans on the user's interpretation.
And so anyway, Yeah, I think this looked okay. It didn't look like super amazing. It wasn't like the best game I'd ever seen or anything like that, but I would say that
A friend of mine who I play games with hates 2D games. He doesn't really have much of an explanation as to why, he just doesn't like them. He believes they're lacking in their ability to immerse him, as the 3D space presents a world that just matches better with his understanding of how a world should look. I have another friend who I work with. He is the opposite. He hates 3D games. He associates gaming with his childhood, and since he's older, there's no concept of a 3D video game back when he played them. 3D games don't align as well with his understanding of what a game is. Because of that, he just doesn't find that they draw him in as often. The point I'm trying to make here is that there is a whole different layer to this conversation. A game looking good, a game feeling right, it just doesn't come down to its visuals matching some creative vision or tone or universe. It's also about the consistency with the identity of the consumer. As consumers, we often gravitate towards experiences that are consistent with our own. You see this a lot with writing and characterization, where good characters are the ones that understand and react to the world and their situations in a way that aligns with what we would deem appropriate or relatable human behavior. But it also extends to the visuals. Do characters look and move the way we believe they should? Do they feel like we can personally attach to them beyond just the moments where they open their mouth? Does the world look and feel a way that I believe it should? Does it make sense to me? For me personally, this is a big reason why, when given the choice, I gravitate towards male characters in games, because as a male, I find it easier to self-insert, especially when the characters are created. They have no unique or written background. It's not just the gender of characters though. Players will consciously and unconsciously gravitate towards characters that are consistent with their own individual identity, or possess traits and flaws that you can see in yourself or others. Broad strokes term you'll often hear in other game reviews is that when characters feel human, or when the world feels immersive. Now there's a lot to dig into here, probably enough for its own separate video, but focusing on the visual, consistency with the identity of the consumer really boils down to whether or not characters and visuals align with what the player believes things should look like based on their own understandings, life experiences, and prior consumption of media. At a surface level, this is really simple. Does a powerful dragon look imposing and grand like it should? Does a wise old shaman have the wear and age visible on their face, the look of a life lived? But dig deeper and this topic can become quite unpredictably complicated, especially when it comes to the unfortunately sensitive battleground that is race and gender in games. Again, there's a whole lot to dive into here, but what I've often found when perusing game criticism in the form of Steam reviews, forum posts, or YouTube comments is that much of it arises from games diverging visually or otherwise with what aligns with players' identities. Be that women who are perceived to be stronger than the player believes they should be, ethnicities present in areas where players believe they have no place, or even small visual cues that awaken negative associations with certain kinds of people. Art is a real complex beast, and even if developers are consistent with their own understandings of a game world, its writing, its tone, the messages that it wishes to convey, you are always at the mercy of interpretation. Despite all of that though, there is a clearly tangible difference between games that understand and respect their universe and games that don't. Games that take great care to make sure their visuals are interesting but still aligned with that central vision, making attempts to really build something deeper than just a set of connected platforms or a scoreboard. My point really for this whole video is this. If you are struggling to find games that just fit right, that just feel good, if you are looking at a landscape of live service offerings and grandiose AAA experiences that, for a more broad or unknown reason, simply aren't tapping into that wonder and immersing you in the same way they used to, then maybe what you're actually looking for is visual consistency. It goes back to the very start of this video. I think people often fall victim to that common rhetoric. Graphics don't matter, that it's gameplay that truly shines, and I think this sentiment comes from a good place. Don't judge a book by its cover, understand what lies beneath, and be willing to look beyond the surface to find a great experience. I'm fully on board with all of that, but to ignore the impact that expert artistry, visual storytelling, and just straight up good graphics have on an overall experience is reducing games down to simply the sum of their programming, which they most certainly are not. It's common sentiment that shocking visuals aren't a barrier to a great experience, and that if a game's inner workings, its systems and fundamentals are strong enough that you'll be able to enjoy it all the same. But after looking at things a bit differently, I also believe that the opposite is true. Weaker gameplay isn't a barrier to enjoy a game if it can draw you in with great art design or fidelity. The extent to which one or the other has an effect really is dependent on the person, and I'm sure you have a good idea of what that is for you. But it's so easy to get caught up in the noise of criticism, interpretation. Games are judged in many ways, but more recently, there's been an alarming trend of declaring the inferiority or unworthiness of a game purely because gameplay or reward structures do not match rigid expectations of depth. Or perhaps even more importantly, this vital element of visual consistency is judged based on whether or not it is consistent with the cultural and political identity of the people criticizing it, a trend that has sadly befallen all kinds of artistic mediums. My advice, the thing that I really want you to take from all of this in the end, is trust your gut. If something looks visually appealing, if its world is consistently grabbing your eye, whether it be through trailers, watching others play, or experiencing it for yourself, jump in if you can afford to. Don't hyperfixate on gameplay structures, reward loops, or perfectly interwoven narratives. And especially don't fall victim to the trap of overt criticism based on another's interpretation of a game's visual appeal. Give a visually consistent experience a chance to win you over and immerse you, and let it transform an otherwise middling formula into an experience that is truly special.